In quite a few fairy tales, there is a repeated motif of be bold, but not too bold. This phrasing makes its appearance even in Spenser's The Faerie Queene, one of the masterworks of poetry in 16th century Britain. The problem is not that Claudia is bold, that she is daring, that she is willing to exert the inner essence of her spirit and her will in order to achieve her goals, in order to achieve what she believes is right and good and just. The problem is that she overexerts herself, that she becomes obsessive in her pursuit of those goals. And we see in Puzzle House that this has been true of Claudia since she was a little girl. There are two comparisons that come to mind. The first is Azula in Avatar: The Last Airbender, particularly the younger version of Azula we see in episode 207, Zuko Alone. Now, obviously Claudia is not the same as Azula, but the character parallels are very similar, and considering that Aaron Ahas was always a big fan of Azula, I don't think it is unreasonable to assert that Claudia is his version of trying to do an Azula-like story, but to do it his way. We see from Azula in Zuko Alone that she has always been like that. She has always been like she is. That's not to say that environmental circumstances did not warp her mind and did not encourage the wrong impulses and the wrong desires in her, desires that lead her to violence and exploitation instead of to virtue and noble behavior. But it is to say that she has not always been completely vile to the extent that she becomes. She has not always been as strategic, but she has never been a normal child. She has always lacked a lot of basic human feelings. She has an astonishing incapacity to understand others. And she has always been kind of cruel. Claudia is, of course, not to that extent as an adult or as a child, but little Claudia still resembles little Azula in that the person she became is very clearly rooted in what we see. Little Claudia is very bold. She is very daring. There is a kind of daring that goes past bravery and is simply an indulgence of creativity and curiosity, a willingness to fulfill one's own wild desires regardless of what the impact of doing so may be, regardless of whether doing so is necessarily prudent or thoughtful. Claudia cannot resist. That ultimately is what I take away from Puzzle House. A lovely little graphic novel that, number one, provides a deep contrast with the person Claudia has become. We get to see little cute kid Claudia doing little cute kid things, as opposed to the heinous actions she commits later in life. But we also see that her childish curiosity does not fade with time. Instead, it grows and mutates into the absolute desire to help those around her and help her family, regardless of the negative consequences of doing so that so plagues present-day Claudia. The other comparison that I see is with Rayla. Claudia and Rayla are remarkably similar characters, and not simply because Callum falls in love with both of them. They are both stubborn to a fault, they are both very committed to their ideals, and they both have an obsessive streak. When they have an idea and a goal that so overwhelms them that they go off and pursue it with all haste and all passion and all fury, there's not a lot that others can do to dissuade them. They become absolutists. I don't think that it's entirely off base to say that there is a very close parallel between Claudia's quest to bring Viren back from the dead and Rayla's quest to kill him forever. Obviously, there is a superficial contrast between these two goals, but the mindsets that drive them are very similar. It is absolutism. It is, in a way, loyalty to a cause, loyalty to a higher ideal, but ultimately, this ideal just serves as a smokescreen or a facade for what's really driving them, which is the desperation they have to serve and fulfill and revitalize their senses of self-concept and self-identity. Who are they and what do they want? For both of them, that basic sense of selfhood depends on being able to do things. It depends on being able to act in a way that fits with their ideals and makes them feel capable and mature and like they have power in a world that is so often rather chaotic and tumultuous. And yet in both cases, it is that precise obsession that leads them to make foolish decisions. Rayla leaving Callum for 2 years made both of them suffer and destroyed the foundation of their relationship to such an extent that that foundation is very difficult to recover. Claudia, of course, commits many more horrific and disturbing actions than that. But the characters are also similar because we see in graphic novels that the flaws that ultimately lead to the bad decisions they make come from aspects of their personality we see in their childhoods. Blood Moon Huntress, I really like as a graphic novel, not just because of the aesthetic, the colors, and the stylism, but mostly because it's an overtly sweet story that hides a lot of melancholy undertones. Superficially, it's the formation of a family, Rayla's increasing closeness with Renan and Athari. Latently, it's Rayla becoming an assassin. It is her tragically linking her sense of self-worth to her ability to commit these rather dark actions. That is the only way she feels that she has any control over her life. And the same is true with Claudia. Early in the graphic novel, we see King Harrow looking much more like Ezrin in his younger days, trying to dissuade Claudia, trying to stop her from practicing dark magic everywhere. But Claudia does not relent. She wants to use dark magic. Not necessarily to achieve these rather grim ends, as is the case later, but simply out of a sense of boundless curiosity, sense of boundless wonder. and interest. This is another place where you can see fairy tale motifs. Fairy tales very often criticize curiosity, criticize the desire to know too much, to go too far, to cross over one too many boundaries. Now, obviously, not all fairy tales need to be read like this, and they can be read in many different ways. Maria Tatar, arguably the foremost folklorist working today in the United States, talks about the different interpretations of the Bluebeard tale, wherein a woman meets a rather strange man and marries him, and then he tells her not to open a secret chamber, and yet she does anyway, and she discerns that there were a lot of corpses of his former wives. This can be read as a tale warning against curiosity, as Bluebeard only starts to become aggressive toward her after she discovers his secret. But as Maria Tatar points out, would it really have been better if she didn't unlock the chamber and didn't know that he was a murderer? Fairy tales can be taken in a lot of different ways, but nonetheless, there is the sense that dark magic is forbidden knowledge, that it's knowing too much, that it's going too far and not respecting proper boundaries, and that Claudia does not stop because she is obsessed with the goals she wants to achieve. Here it is lighthearted, but it nonetheless speaks to a latent desire that we see boiling inside of Claudia. Hannah Arendt talks a lot about how we define ourselves socially. We define ourselves by the actions we take. That is how we make good on the potential that is inside us, on our abilities to think and to judge and to discern. All of those internal qualities are good, but they are ultimately impotent unless they are acted, unless they are accompanied by some kind of behavior. We decide who we are going to be through the choices we make, through our actions. They are how we reveal ourselves to each other. So we can say that, oh, we ultimately have a side of ourselves that other people do not see. But for Hannah Arendt, this kind of view is limited. We ultimately define ourselves through the decisions that we make, through our actions, through the interactions between people in a social space. That is how we define ourselves. That's how our basic senses of self are created. They are not simply abstract. They are not simply given to us. They are constant works of progress that we shape through our behavior. It's easy to be distracted by this. Arendt's teacher and lover, Martin Heidegger, talked a lot about how Dasein, our actual self-aware sense of our being in the world, is distracted by these abstractions that cloud our judgments. We drift into idle talk or banal curiosity. We take interest in these superficial and transient sensations, but ultimately distract us from our real being in the world, which is interrelational. It is defined through how the world acts on us and how we act on the world. The world and the self are not separate, quite the opposite. They are inevitably informed by each other. Our idea of what the world is one that is shaped by us, not necessarily by our choices, but by our standards, our values, our ideals, our basic modes of perception in the world that are dictated to us both by our choices and by our culture. And the world, in its turn, acts on us. And our conceptions of ourselves, if they are not to be mere hollow abstractions, are not based on these idealized notions of who we are, but how we actually reveal ourselves to be through our choices and our behavior, through how we actually interact with the world. All this is relevant because Claudia does not think of herself as being some dark and cruel person as a small child. She doesn't even think of herself as being a dark and cruel person as an adult. She believes what she is doing is justified. But beyond the superficial perceptions of how Claudia thinks of herself and how others initially think of her, we see her defining herself through her actions, through how she decides to behave. Now, I do not want to imply that Claudia was doomed because of these tendencies that we see in her as a child. That would be fatalistic. The Dragon Prince is not fatalistic. And certainly neither are Hannah Arendt or Martin Heidegger as existentialists. It is the case that we reveal ourselves through our actions. But that means that we have the capacity to transform who we are, to transform ourselves through changing our behavior. This is not done freely, it is not done simply, it is not done dogmatically. Our behavior emerges from an earnest conception of how we view the world and how we view ourselves. If we are to change how we behave, we thus need to change these underlying phenomenological issues, to use the philosophical term. We need to change how our experience of the world is, how things seem to us based both on our own perceptions and values and experiences, and through the standards and mores of the outside world. Claudia has a lot of work to do, but I definitely do not want to imply that she is doomed because of what she did as a child. I do, however, want to say that how Claudia's behavior as a child parallels her behavior as an adult is not unimportant. They are ultimately manifestations through action of these underlying beliefs and these underlying perceptions of the world. Claudia ultimately demonstrates a willingness to make certain choices, and that willingness to choose curiosity and wonder and what she believes is right for those around her over these prohibitions on dark magic ultimately reflects an underlying tendency in her that remains even as she grows much older. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos like this one before anyone else. Tell me, what do you think about Claudia? Have you read Puzzle House? What do you think about Claudia's behavior in it? Is she just a cute little kid, or is there something a bit darker there? Anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.